Be Attentive, Series 5, Volume 17, June 10th, 1924. The one who lives in my will, having to centralize everything within herself, must be like the heartbeat of all creation. And as all things palpitate in her by virtue of my will, she must form one single heartbeat, to return to me in that heartbeat the heartbeats of everyone and of everything, and to bring me back the glory and the love of all things which came from me. I must find all in the soul in whom my will reigns, so that containing all, she may give me all that the others should give me. My daughter, living in my will is very different from the other sanctities, and this is why, up until now, the way and the true teachings of living in it cannot be found. One can say that the other sanctities are the shadows of my divine life, while my will is the source of the divine life. Therefore be attentive in the exercises of living in my will, so that from you may come the true way and the exact and precise teachings for those who, wanting to live in it, may find not the shadow, but the true sanctity of the divine life. Volume 17, June 14th, 1924. This morning, while I was in my usual state, I don't know whether it was a dream, I saw my late confessor, who seemed to take something twisted from within my mind, and he fixed it and untied it. I asked him why he was doing that, and he said to me, "I have come to tell you to be attentive to order, because God is order, and one sentence, one word of what the Lord tells you, which you do not report just as it is enough for being not according to order. And it may cause doubts and difficulties in those who will read what you write about his adorable will." On hearing this, I said, "Is it perhaps that you know I have written disordered things until now?" And the confessor, No, but be attentive for the future. Let the things you write be clear and simple, as Jesus says them to you, and omit nothing, because if only one little sentence, one word, of those which Jesus tells you is missing, or if you write it differently, that's enough for order to be lacking. In fact, those expressions, even minute, serve to give light, to allow the meaning to be understood with greater clarity, and to link the order of the truths which good Jesus manifests to you. You are apt to omit many little things, while the little things link the great, and the great link the little. Therefore be attentive in the future, that everything may be well ordered." Having said this, he disappeared from me, and I remained a little concerned. Volume 17, June 20th, 1924. I needed two humanities, my own in order to form the redemption, and the other, of one creature, to form the Fiat voluntas tua, on earth as it is in heaven. One more necessary than the other, because if in the first one I was to come to redeem man, in the second I was to come to restore him to the only purpose for which he was created, to open the currents of graces between the human will and the divine, and to make the divine reign on earth as it does in heaven. And just as my humanity, in order to redeem man, let my will reign on earth as it does in heaven, so do I keep looking for another humanity, which, letting it reign within itself on earth as it does in heaven, may let me accomplish all the designs of my creation. Therefore be attentive in letting my will alone reign in you, and I will love you with the same love with which I loved my most holy humanity. Volume 17, July 25th, 1924. The sanctity in my will is not subject to intermittent phases, but it comes to be associated to that continuous act of the eternal will, which never ceases, but is always acting, always operating, always triumphant. It always loves and never stops. Therefore, the sanctity in my will brings into the soul the mark of the works of her Creator, that is, his continuous love, the continuous preservation of all the things created by him. It never changes and is immutable. One who is subject to change belongs to the earth, not to heaven. Changing is of the human will, not of the divine. Interrupting good is of the creature, not of the Creator. Therefore all this would be unbefitting for the sanctity of living in my will, because it contains the uniform, the image, of the sanctity of her Creator. Therefore be attentive, leave all rights to the supreme will, and I will keep forming in you the sanctity of living in my will. Volume 17, August 9th, 1924. My will is more than Mother Earth, more than a tender mother. I hide in my will this soul who works and lives in my will. I help her to make the seed of her will die, that it may be reborn with mine, and I form my favorite plant. I nourish her with the celestial milk of my divinity, and my jealousy is such that I keep her attached to my breast, and my will remains pressed around her, that she may grow beautiful and strong, and all to my likeness. Therefore, my daughter, be attentive, always work in my will, if you want to make your beloved Jesus content. I would like you to stop everything, in order for you to take up this point alone, living and working constantly in my will. Volume 17, September 11th, 1924. See, my will is one, and embraces all eternity. Now, by living in my will and by making it her own, the soul comes to take part in all the joys and goods that my will contains, and she becomes the owner of them. And even though while being on earth she does not feel all those joys and goods, by keeping them in deposit within her will, by virtue of my will done on earth, when she dies and finds herself up there in heaven, she will feel all those joys and goods which my will delivered in heaven while she was living on earth. Nothing will be taken away from her. On the contrary, it will be multiplied. In fact, if the saints enjoy my will in heaven because they live in it, it is always enjoying that they live in glory, while the soul who lives in my will on earth lives suffering. And it is not appropriate for her to have that joy and those goods which are reserved for her in heaven with greater abundance, because of the work she has done and her living in my divine will. So how many immense riches does the one who lives in my will on earth not take in heaven? I can say that all eternity makes its round around her to enrich her and to make her happy. She is deprived of nothing of all that the divine will contains. She is its daughter, its very will, and it loves her so much that all its joys are placed in common with her. Therefore be attentive, my daughter, and do not want to oppose my designs, which I made upon you. Volume 17, September 18th, 1924. This living in my will is the greatest gift I want to give to the creatures. My goodness wants to show off more and more love toward creatures, and since I gave them everything, I want to give them the gift of my will, so that in possessing it, they may appreciate and love the great good they possess. And do not be surprised if you see that they do not understand. In order to understand, they would have to dispose themselves to the greatest of sacrifices, that of not giving life, even in holy things, to their own will. Then would they feel the possession of mine, and would touch with their own hands what it means to live in my will. You, however, be attentive, and do not be bothered by the difficulties they raise. Little by little I will make my way to make them understand the living in my will. Volume 17, September 22nd, 1924. My daughter, living in my will brings with itself the loss of any right of one's own will. All the rights belong to the divine will, and if the soul does not lose all of her rights, it cannot be called true living in my will. At the most she lives resigned, conformed. In fact, living in my will is not only that she does her action according to my will, but that in all of the interior of the creature she gives no place to one affection, one thought, or one desire, or even one breath, in which my will does not have its place. Nor would my will tolerate even one human affection of which it is not the life. It would feel disgusted in letting the soul live in my will with her own affections, thoughts, and other things, which a human will could have without the divine. And do you think it is easy that a soul would willingly lose her rights? Oh, how difficult it is. There are souls who, when they reach the point of losing all the rights over their own will, draw back and content themselves with conducting a life in the middle, because to lose her rights is the greatest sacrifice that a creature could do. But it is the one which disposes my goodness to open the doors of my will, giving her my divine rights in exchange, by letting her live in it. Therefore be attentive, and never go out of the boundaries of my will. Volume 17, May 1st, 1925. The mission of my will is the greatest that can exist. There is no good which does not descend from it. There is no glory which does not come from it. Everything is centered in it. Our interior works and those which we have delivered, the creation of the angels, of the world, of men, all virtue, all merits, all predestinations, all goods, all the glory of the chosen ones, all the mysteries of the infinite love, which are still unknown to man, and the past, the present, the future, all in one act and inact, and in one single point. Therefore be attentive, and do not want to waste time with doubts or uncertainties. Everything I told you for this mission was necessary, not for you, but for the honor, the glory, the knowledge, and the sanctity of my will, and of its dominion in the creatures. And since my will is one was to be the creature to whom I had to entrust it, and through whom it would make its rays blaze to do good to all. Volume 17, May 4th, 1925. So I did with my dear mamma. I filled her with so much grace, that she can give graces to all without ever exhausting even one of them. So I did with my humanity. There is no good which it does not possess, and the very divinity, to be able to give it to whomever wants it. So I did with you. I enclosed in you my will, and with it I enclosed myself. I enclosed in you its knowledges, its secrets, its light. I filled your soul up to the brim, so much so that what you write is nothing other than the outpouring of what you contain of my will. And even though it now serves you alone, and a few glimmers of light serve some other souls, I am content, because being light, it will make its way by itself, more than a second sun, in order to illuminate the human generations and to bring about the fulfillment of our works, that our will be known and loved, and that it reign as life within the creatures. This was the purpose of creation. This was its beginning. This will be its means and end. Therefore be attentive, because this is about rescuing that eternal will which, with so much love, wants to dwell in the creatures. But it wants to be known. It does not want to be like a stranger. Rather, it wants to give out its goods and become life of each one. But it wants its rights whole, its place of honor. It wants the human will to be banished, the only enemy for it and for man. Volume 17, May 10th, 1925. My sweet Jesus, all goodness told me. My daughter, the empty space is my unrequited will, placed at your disposal, which should be filled with so many acts, as many as the creature would have done, had they all fulfilled our will. This immense void that you see, which represents our will, came out from our divinity for the benefit of all in creation, to delight everyone and everything. Therefore, as a consequence, all creatures should have filled this void with the return of their acts, and by giving their wills to their Creator. But since they did not do so, they saddened us with the most grave offense that can possibly be imagined. This is why we called you with a special mission, so that this void may be returned and filled with all that the others should have given us. And this is the reason for which we disposed you with a long chain of graces, and then asked you if you wanted to live in our will. And you answered with a yes, firm and irretractable, binding your will to our throne. And you did not want to recognize it any more, because human will and divine will do not reconcile and cannot live together. That yes, your will, exists and is tightly bound to our throne. And this is why your soul, like a little child reborn in our divine volition, is drawn before the Supreme Majesty, because as you rise up toward us, your will, which is already ours, precedes you, and you feel our will attracting you like a powerful magnet. And instead of looking at your will, you interest yourself only in bringing onto our lap everything you did in our will, as the greatest homage which befits us, and as the return most pleasing to us. Your indifference to your will, as you've already lost sight of it, and our will alone living in you, make us festive. Your little acts done, and our will bring us the joys of the whole creation. It seems that everything smiles at us, and that all created things make feast. And in seeing that you descend from our throne with not even the slightest attention to your will, which is as though lost within ours, and in seeing you going back to earth taking our will, is an infinite joy for us. This is why I always say to you, be attentive upon our will, because there is much to do in it. The more you do, the greater the feast you make us, and our volition will pour out in torrents, inside and outside of you. Volume 17, May 21st, 1925. I remained frightened in hearing of the great evil I do, by merely reflecting on whether I should surrender or not to what Jesus wants from me, even though I always end up surrendering. What would happen if, and may this never be, I did not surrender? I felt distressed, fearing I might do that, and my adorable Jesus having compassion for my distress, as I felt crushed, fearing that, may this never be, I might not always do his most holy will, came back and told me, "My daughter, courage, do not fear. I told you this, and I showed you how all of heaven is bound to that will of mine which reigns in you, so that you may never surrender to your will, since the divine will and the human will are the fiercest enemies of each other. And since the divine will is stronger, holier, more immense, it is convenient for the enemy, the human will, to be under it, at its feet, and to serve as the footstool of the divine will. In fact, the one who must live in my will should not consider himself a terrestrial citizen. Rather, he should consider himself a citizen of heaven. And it is with just reason that all the blessed feel shaken, because the one who lives with their same will is thinking of letting the human will enter the field, cause of disorder, which has never entered the celestial regions. You must be convinced of the fact that by living of my will, the life of your will is ended. It no longer has reason to exist. This is why I have told you many times that living in my will is very different from just doing my will. These are free to give it and to take it back, because they live as terrestrial citizens, while the one who lives in it is bound to an eternal point, flows together with my will, and is surrounded by an unconquerable fortress. Therefore do not fear, and be attentive. Volume 17, May 30th, 1925. These doors are opened for you, and as these knowledges reach the midst of creatures, the doors will be opened for them, because knowledge makes love arise for the good which is known. The great door, which I will open, will be my will, so that they may close the little door of their will. My will shall make them abhor their own, because in the face of my will, the human is incapable of acting. With the light of my will, the creature can see how insignificant and good at nothing her own is. Therefore, as a consequence, the creatures who will penetrate into these divine knowledges, according to the efforts they will make in order to reach them, will keep their own will aside. Moreover, you must know that when I manifest to you one knowledge about my will, only then do I decide to open another door of my knowledge, when you have let all the good of what I have manifested to you enter into your soul. If I did not do so, yours would only be the news of that good, but not the possession of it. And I cannot do this. Whenever I speak, I want the good which I manifest to be possessed. Therefore, be attentive in the practice of my will, that I may open to you more doors of my knowledges, and that you may enter more into the divine possessions. Volume 17, June 18th, 1925. Do you think that my continuous being within you, feeding you my prayer, and making you feel my pains, which together with me acquire another value, other effects, another power, is nothing? I could say that I am making the first statue, the first soul of the regeneration of my will in her. Then it will be easier to form copies. This is why I always say to you, be attentive, for this is about something too great, and about the most important thing which exists in heaven and on earth. It is about rescuing the rights of our will, about giving back to us the purpose of creation, about returning to us all the glory for which all things were made, and about making us pour out all the graces which our will had established to give to the creatures, had they fulfilled our will in everything. Volume 17, June 25th, 1925. My daughter, everything is in understanding the great good which comes to her by doing my will, and by operating and living in it. It is this will that wants the sacrifice. And since this will does not adapt itself to mix and to live together with a low, small, and finite will, it wants to render the acts of the soul who wants to live in my will eternal, infinite, and divine. And how can it do this if she wants to place the breath of her human will, even in a holy thing, as you say? It is always a finite will, and then living in my will would no longer be a reality, but a way of saying. On the other hand, the office of my will is total dominion, and it is right that the little atom of the human will be conquered, and that it lose its field of action in my will. What would you say if a little lamp, a match, or a spark of fire wanted to enter into the sun to follow its way, and to form its field of light and of action in the center of the sun? If the sun had reason, it would become indignant, and its light and heat would annihilate that little lamp, that match, that spark. And you would be the first one to mock them, condemning their boldness in wanting to form their own field of action within the light of the sun. Such is the breath of the human will within mine, even in good. Therefore be attentive, so that yours may have life in nothing. I covered and hid all of you within me, so that you may have no eyes, if not to look at my will alone, to give it free field of action in your soul. You have reached the end of the Be Attentive series, Volume 17. Fiat.